Hey everyone, Aaron here from MTGChallengers, and welcome to another Magic the Gathering deck tech. Today I'll be going over Azorius Devotion for Born of the Gods Standard. So this is a mono white splash blue mid-range deck that I came up with. It's really unique, really interesting kind of deck to play that really hasn't been seeing the play that I think it deserves. It works more or less like your standard devotion decks, where you pile up the board with greedily costed permanents and then use Nykthos to make a bunch of mana to ramp into all your win conditions. So let's get started with the creatures here. First up, I have a playset of Precinct Captain. A fine card for this deck. The mana cost makes it great for devotion and an early turn play. The first strike is also awesome to be able to stabilize against more aggressive decks that are going to be running a lot of 1 and 2 toughness creatures, like Burning Tree Emissary, Rakdos Cackler, Voice of Resurgence, and Mutavault as well, which is really important. Beyond that, the token ability can work really well for just pumping out chump blockers, and they do synergize very well with Archangel of Thune. Now onto the 3 drops, I have a playset of Boros Reckoner. Really awesome creature for this deck. It's a great devotion enabler with a mana cost, and it won't actually be prohibitive at all for the deck since all of the sources of blue are dual lands, so every land but Nykthos can still tap for white. Beyond that, the card is great in its own right. It stabilizes against the aggressive strategies so well, which is really important for the deck since it can take a little bit for the devotion engine to get going. So you can block and kill their 2-powered guy and redirect the damage from it and take out another guy, or deal it to the face, or if it's against like a Spike Jester or something 3-power, you can give it first strike and kill it no problem. And even against like Gruul monsters with huge creatures, you can still use it as a very nice chump blocker. He will die, but you'll be able to redirect a huge amount of damage from the Pelucranos or Xenagos that you block. Next up, I have 4 copies of Brimaz, King of Oreskos. He's just an incredible creature for this deck. The pretty intensive mana cost is good for devotion, and he can be a win condition on his own if left unabated. Beyond the basic stats, he has a couple of really cool synergies in this deck. Having him and Ephara out at the same time is pretty amazing, since he has Vigilance, so you'll be attacking and blocking with him just about every turn, and each time that happens you'll have a creature enter the battlefield under your control, so you'll be drawing an extra card at each upkeep, which is just amazing for card advantage. Another one is all of the tokens he creates will be pumped up by Archangel of Thune, which is going to be quite a lot of damage when they all get counters. He's just a powerhouse, especially for this deck. Onto the 4 drops, which are the gods I have in here. I have 2 Heliod, God of the Sun. I felt that the deck could use a couple of these, mainly due to it being a devotion deck, so he will be a creature for really cheap most of the time, which is awesome. Also, giving Vigilance to things like Boros Reckoner and Archangel of Thune is just dumb. Beyond that, he can bring you back after a board wipe with his token generating ability, and he's one of the only gods that actually does stuff on his own, so he's fairly solid here. I also have 2 copies of Ephara, God of the Polis. Again, mainly since this is a devotion deck, so I thought why not. Like Heliod, she will be a creature a decent bit of the time, somewhat less since the devotion requirement is a little higher. She provides some really nice card advantage, which is important to mid-range decks, and again, she's just nuts with Brimaz. Now we're getting into the main win conditions of the deck. I have a playset of Archangel of Thune. Amazing card. The lifelink is awesome for stabilizing against more aggressive decks, and once she gets going, it's very difficult for your opponent to win, because all of your creatures are just going to be huge, including the Angel, which will fly over each turn for more and more damage, causing you to gain more and more life. It will win the game on its own if your opponent doesn't deal with it quickly, which makes it an awesome win condition. And the final creature I have in here is Angel of Serenity, 2 copies of it. It's a really good late game bomb, comes down and either board wipes my opponent, or I exile all the awesome creatures in my grave, which I will get back when it's dealt with. It's so good because no matter what happens, your opponent loses, because either it's 5 power in the air that will hit them over and over and kill them eventually, and even if they kill it with a hero's downfall or something, it's still going to be bad for them since I'm going to get all my cards back to my hand. And of course, it's awesome when you can ramp into it a couple of turns early with Nykthos and whatnot. So that's it for the creatures. Onto the other spells. I have 4 Azorius Charm. Pretty nice card for this deck. It keeps the aggressive creatures at bay until you get out your big win conditions, and it's a cantrip if nothing else. But the lifelink ability, which is usually the least used on the charm, is really interesting in this deck. If you have Archangel of Thune out out and ready to attack, you can play Azorius Charm to give all of your creatures lifelink, and the life gain will trigger for each individual creature. So instead of putting just one +1/+1 counter on each creature from the Archangel, you're going to put 4 or 5 instead, and gain a huge amount of life to boot. So that's definitely a pretty solid interaction there, which is really why it makes the cut as a 4 of. Next I have 4 copies of Detention Sphere. Awesome card, just great to have some removal that gets rid of just about everything. Creatures, gods, planeswalkers, enchantments. It's just a great card, especially for this deck. It goes along with the splash of blue really well, and it counts for devotion on top of everything. One of the better cards in the deck. Then I have 3 Sphinx's Revelation. Like the Angel, it's a late game bomb to really close things out. Gaining a bunch of life and drawing a bunch of cards is usually enough to get ahead a lethal amount. It is double blue, which kind of pushes the splash a bit, but again, it's really late game, so you'll have plenty of time to get the 2 sources of blue out there. And if you have a lot of devotion, you can use Nykthos to really maximize the size of the Revelation. It's also just nice to have it in here to be able to race blue-white and Esper Control that are also going to be using it as a win condition. And the final spell I have in here is Elspeth, Sun's Champion, 2 copies of her. She's really established herself in Standard as a win condition for mid-range and control decks, and she's just as good here. You'll create tons and tons of tokens that will protect her and you, and be pumped up by Archangel of Thune, and then you'll ultimate her and fly over with them for the win. Beyond that, her -3 ability can be really awesome against things like Gruul and Jund monsters to kill their Polucranoses, Stormbreath Dragons, Reaper of the Wild, stuff like that. It also deals with Blood Baron of Vizkopa, which is really important. Using her that way is a great follow-up to a turn 5 Archangel, since the Angel will still be 3 power at the time, so it will be spared. It's also a permanent that will contribute to devotion. It's just an all-around amazing card for this deck. So that's it for the spells. Onto the mana base. I'm running 12 dual lands, which are 4 Hallowed Fountain, 4 Temple of Enlightenment, and 4 Azorius Guildgate. So these are the 12 sources of blue that I have in the deck, and it works awesome since they can all still tap for white, so the splash of blue won't interfere with the casting of things like Boros Reckoner. Then I have a playset of Nykthos Shrine to Nyx. This is a mid-range devotion deck, so of course it's going to run Nykthos. 4 of because you really do want to see it every game, even though it's legendary. If you hit your curve, you can get out Angel of Serenity turn 5 and Elspeth turn 4, which is just awesome. In the late game, you can use it to cast huge Sphinx's Revelations, and then the next turn you'll just dump all the cards you drew onto the field and close the game out. And finally, I have 9 basic planes for a total of 25 lands. Great amount for this deck since I need plenty of lands to cast my Elspeths, Archangels, and Angels of Serenity, as well as Sphinx's Revelations in the late game. So that's it for the main board. Let's move on to the sideboard. First, I have 1 copy of Banisher Preist in the side. It's a really solid addition to the removal package if I need some more exile effects beyond Detention Sphere. I can also side out 1 sphere in place of this to make the deck a little bit more aggressive if I want to. Then I have 2 Fiendslayer Paladin, obviously to be sided in against decks like Mono Black Devotion, Rakdos, and Jund, decks with black and red. Just nice to have a hard to remove creature that's solid and still goes along with the devotion aspect of the deck. 2 Wear and Tear is really good for additional enchantment removal in case the Detention Sphere's main deck aren't enough. Since I have the exiling from those, I felt that I should run this above Revoke Existence since this is cheaper and it's at instant speed. I also have a playset of Gainsay, against Mono Blue Devotion of course, to counter anything and everything that they cast at a cheap cost. It's also really solid against Blue-White control variants, since it will counter the bulk of their powerful spells. I have 3 copies of Rootborn Defenses, obviously against blue-white control decks running Supreme Verdict and Fated Retribution. Board wipes can really be a problem for devotion decks, and this definitely helps to mitigate that problem. Also, you will usually get another guy out of it since the deck does run a good bit of token producers. I also have 2 Blind Obedience to really slow down the faster aggressive decks that are relying on little haste creatures to swing in the turn they come into play. It's also solid against Gruul monsters since Stormbreath Dragon and guys that they pump with Xenagos will come in tapped, which will really slow them down until you get your Nykthos and Archangel engines up and running. And finally, I have a 3rd copy of Elspeth, Sun's Champion in the side, mainly for the -3 ability against monster decks running a lot of huge creatures. It also deals with a couple in particular that this deck can have a lot of trouble with, Stormbreath Dragon and Blood Baron of Vizkopa, since they both have protection from white. So that's it for this deck tech. Be sure to check out our others. To see these decks in action, check out our gameplays, and also be sure to check out our Facebook page for behind the scenes information regarding upcoming decks, gameplays, and other projects. Thanks for visiting, and if you like what you see, subscribe for more Magic the Gathering content.